Hey there everybody, it's Nathan Cool with nathancoolphoto.com, and in this episode I want to talk about one of the most misunderstood items when it comes to doing flash for interior real estate photography using the Flambient technique, and that's how luminosity works to your advantage or how you might get some errors with it, how best to correct it. What I want to do is to show the principles behind this, a little bit about the color science so you can understand whether it's real estate photography or other genres that you may come across, some of the issues to look out for to understand it. So just some brief color science behind that. Then I'm going to apply that to some real world examples. Now, this has nothing to do with white balance at all. And sometimes people think that, well, I can, be between using an ambient shot or I can do some flash shots, and I just correct white balance between the two and I just blend them together using like normal mode. But this goes beyond that. In fact, that's one of the worst approaches that I'd recommend using for most cases, and you'll see why throughout this video. Instead, this is about the proper distribution of color by the proper distribution of light and how that applies in color science by three primary elements known as hue, saturation, and brightness, or the HSB model. Now, this is something that I stress about throughout my real estate photography series. You've probably seen other videos that I talk about this, and I really delve into this as one of the core elements in my latest book, which is Mastering Color in Photography. Link to the videos, link to all the books down in the description for this video. But without further ado, let's dive into some of the science and then real world application, how to prevent this from happening, what to do then when also you're faced with it in post-processing. Let's get started. So this is the real world example that I'm going to go through, and I'm going to cover some of the color science real quick on what goes on when we're trying to do flambient for something like this that started with an ambient shot like this, and we had some problems trying to do flash because it's too dark at the far end here. And if we bring that into then Photoshop, a few different things will be going on. So here's our ambient shot, and let's say underneath of it's that single flash shot. And if I turn that ambient shot into luminosity mode, when I go over here to these cabinets, we can see that they look washed out. So a lot of times it's very tempting to just use normal mode and blend that in, but you'd have inaccurate color. So instead, what I do in cases like this, and you've seen this throughout my lighting guide, my other examples, is that I'll start incorporating flash. And that's where I'm flashing on one side. You can see that brightened up that area. And then of course I flash on the other side to edit myself out. And then there were window pulls that were eventually put in. Going back over to Photoshop, let's turn that flambient layer back on, our ambient layer, and it's in luminosity mode. If I zoom in here and I see that it's washed out, if I go to our shot where I was using two flashes, we can see the color is corrected. So once again, that's using this shot where I'm now filling in the light that's over here, and I'm getting a better effect out of then using ambient. Zooming back in here. Now this isn't the finished product, this is just to show what can happen. If I use just the one flash, you can see it's washed out. And if I use then the two flash, it's got an accurate color. And by the way, this little pixel we're going to test in a little bit. But we can see here that there's still an issue with this gray, and that's coming from a reflection from the flash. All these things make it very tempting to just use that ambient layer in normal mode. But if we did that and not in luminosity mode, then we have a bunch of problems. So we've got green that's underneath of the counters, the cabinets here. So we see that on the backsplash there's a green tint. Over here there's a red tint, and it's a little bit warm. White balance wouldn't correct this, and neither would tint, because there's different colors that are also on the wood. So the only way to get true accurate color across the board here is to use enough flash. One flash gets us close, but it's too dark, and then two flash gets us all the closer. So now, why is this happening when we turn this ambient layer into luminosity mode and we're getting this washed out view if we just use one flash? Let's just touch on color science just very quickly so you understand, and then I'm going to show how to correct this. So what happens when we're looking at color? We're not just looking at hue. There's three primary elements, and you can see these when you select the color picker tool from Photoshop. This is something, it's known as the HSB model. It's something that I talk about extensively throughout my book, Mastering Color in Photography, because we can see the different elements at play and know how to utilize these to our advantage. So yes, we pick a color by selecting a hue, and we can intensify the color with saturation, but notice what brightness does to it also. Brightness can lead to what looks like a washed out or an underexposed type of image where the colors are not accurate. They're going to be too dark or they're going to be too bright. And a little more behind that is that every color, when we take a look at it on a color wheel, every color has a certain amount of luminance to it. So these are our advancing and receding colors like I show in Mastering Color in Photography. If we remove the hue and saturation from those colors, turn it into grayscale, we can see the luminance. And every single color has a different level of luminance, so a different level of brightness, the B in the HSB model. This then will affect how we apply Flambient depending on the different colors that are going to be underneath of that luminosity layer, which was our ambient shot that had all the colors thrown away. So that has a major effect on it. So let's go back over here to our layers and see what we're up against. Let's do some sampling. We know that the ambient shot isn't correct, but let's zoom in here to this little pixel that we want to do some testing, and we can see how this gets applied to that HSB model. So I'm going to just zoom in here really close so we can see that pixel. There we go. Okay, now in our one flash shot compared to our two flash shot, we can see there's a different color. But how does it actually measure, and what does that mean for HSB and adding luminosity on it? Let's take the color picker tool and let's select that center pixel. In here, we can see that it is not a desaturated color. In fact, the saturation, the S here, is 59%. The hue, whatever, 34, that's just the type of color that it was selected, but it's not a desaturated color. But notice that the brightness is very low. The brightness down here is only 25%. So that's a very low brightness. Let's just click OK. Now let's go down to when we used the two flashes. Now this got us the more accurate color when we used flambient blending. And why? When we select that center pixel, we're going to see the HSB model change. In particular, I want you to keep an eye on what happens to brightness first. So I'm going to click on that. Notice brightness will go from 25% to 63%. So it nearly tripled the amount of brightness. Now that had a major effect on the color, but there was more to it than that. Let's go back to our original color using just the one flash. Let's sample this again, and now look at what happens to hue and saturation. At the same time that brightness goes up and almost triples, the saturation increased by 11%. And the hue changed a little bit as well. That tells us that by using more flash and getting ourselves out of that darkness, we're now seeing some of the truer colors that are there. To see that one more time as an example to really drive this home, let's do a different experiment, and let's use the original color, and let's take that brightness and let's increase that to the 63%. Let's increase that, and what do we have? A color that looks somewhat similar to that center pixel, but notice that it's a little bit desaturated over here. If I select now that center pixel, watch the saturation and the hue change. Boom, we have a richer color. So let's select that color. So that's why we have, when we're using the ambient layer in luminosity mode above our two flashes that we used here to distribute more light and hence more color, that we have more accurate color than if we used our one flash, which when we introduce that underneath of our luminosity layer, our ambient layer in luminosity mode, everything looks washed out. So how do you correct for this? First and foremost is you want to be able to flash correctly. It's best to distribute as much flash as you can so that you aren't just filling in shadows and relying on ambient to do most of your work for you. You want to make sure that you have proper color throughout a scene. That is rule number one to using flash for interior real estate photography, is that we want accurate colors. We need to have an accurate color base. We want to use the ambient layer only for light and shadow so we can add some luminance to it. So that's the first thing. So we have some there. Let's say that we did a 50-50 blend on this layer. So we have 50% ambient that came in here. So we still have though, and even though that's starting to look more natural than if we use just that one flash shot, over here though, we still have this little issue. Now you might have seen me do this on other videos and throughout the books. I'll just do it really quick here to show the correction. What you do is you go down to your flashed shot, you take the color picker and you sample the wood that has a correct color. So we sample that. You just click OK. You go above your ambient layer and you want a color fill layer. So you go to layer and then you'd go to fill, new fill layer, and what you want is solid color. So you select that, call it whatever you'd like. It's going to be the color that you originally selected then from that color picker tool. Turn its mode into color. Take the layer mask and invert it. I like to do Control-I. Mac, you can do Command-I. Now take the polygon tool. So we'll take a polygon tool here, and that's just polygon lasso tool. And safely then draw an area where you're going to do those edits. That way you don't get that color on other stuff. Let's say that we wanted to just edit this area right here, which is probably the most affected by that. Now you can take a brush, and I'm going to use about a 30% flow. You can see up here I've got a 30% flow, and I'm going to make that brush a little bit bigger. And then all I have to do is just tap some of that color in there. And I'm doing that by just painting on the mask here. And you can see now that layer, which is in color blending mode, is changing the color. It's now not affecting the luminance portion. It's not affecting our brightness, the B in our HSB model. This is affecting our hue and our saturation. So now I can just deselect that. We can see that with it, it looks like this. Without it, it looks like that. So that gets us a lot closer to what we're doing, and you can apply that effect wherever you want. Now, this is better than using just the ambient layer in normal mode, because if you did, once again, the colors would not be accurate. You'd have to then struggle with these different cacophony of colors that are all over the place. So having a base of properly lit, thus properly colored base layer that you're using for your flash, once you have the proper color, then you can add your ambient on top of it, and then where you have an ambient artifact due to too much light or too little light, either a reflection from the flash or not enough light in a place where you need it, then of course you can use one of the color fill layer techniques to then fix it. And once again, once this was all edited with the window pull and everything else, the final product looked like this. So we can see that there's a lot more to it than just color of the ambient shot or just increasing our luminosity to it. So we have to ensure that we have a base color that we can work with. This is why in my interiors book I talk about so much that we need to ensure that yes, we are filling in some shadows where we need to be, but one of the importances of using flash photography is that we get accurate colors throughout a scene, and that way when we apply luminance to it, we can get accurate colors. It gets you the accuracy of colors, it gets you the proper light distribution that you want, so you can get a more accurate and impactful real estate photography image. Anyways, I hope this video was useful for you and that you can use some of this in your photography as well. If you did like this video and you want to see more, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. It won't cost anything. And as soon as one of these videos is posted, you'll be the first to know. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, take care, be safe, and get out there and shoot something.